Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and we have RuthAnn Zimmerman back on the show today to talk again about another hot topic. This week, we're going to talk about teenagers. Last week, we talked about responsibilities and chores and how to give your kids meaningful life skills and be intentional with that. If you have not listened to that episode yet, I highly recommend that you do. And this week, we're going to speak life into this topic of teens, of which we each have several. I think that's going to be a really edifying and fun conversation for you guys to listen to. Before we dive into that, I want to highlight our podcast sponsor, Voetberg Music Academy. If you have ever looked at your bill for private lessons for individual students in your home and winced because it was so high, I highly recommend you check out Voetberg because they allow students to learn together using the same account for as little as and maybe less than $30 a month, especially if you use my code MSForMama20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled. They have lessons in guitar, ukulele, mandolin, fiddle, and piano. And they have fun ways of encouraging your students to stay engaged and motivated, like 24-hour access to your teachers, being able to play back your lessons and work at your own pace. And you can even get badges mailed to your door when you achieve certain milestones. Such a fun way for kids to learn and to want to keep learning. You can use the code MSForMama20 at checkout at VoetbergMusicAcademy.com. I also want to mention our podcast sponsor, Summit Ministries. They are an apologetics ministry that helps young people ages 13 to 25 to know what they believe, why they believe, to stand firm on it, and to be able to express it with clarity and kindness. If that sounds like something your students would benefit from, they have both in-person and online options, and you can check them out at summit.org/mama and use the code MAMA26 for an incredible discount. Okay, we're going to jump right into that conversation with RuthAnn. I can't wait to hear your feedback on this. I think you're going to be really blessed by what she has to share. Okay, welcome back to my conversation with RuthAnn Zimmerman. Last week, we talked all about responsibilities and engendering self-discipline in our children and teaching them how to be responsible adults starting from a very young age. And I absolutely loved hearing RuthAnn's wisdom on this topic. And this week, we are going to talk about the topic of older children, teens, young adult children, what a joy and blessing they are, and how we came to have that mindset. And I mentioned this last week and we didn't ever get to it, but I want to talk about the concept of parentification because that is an accusation that a lot of moms, especially moms that have quite a few children, get, especially with their older children. So we're gonna touch on all of those. But hey, RuthAnn, I'm glad you're here.
I am glad to be back, and I'm very excited to talk about older children because I feel like the world has talked about older children, the secular world, long enough, and it's time for us to debunk some of those negative conversations about teenagers and young adult children.
Absolutely. And I think what you just said really made me smile because one of the reasons we connect as much as we do is we both have very no nonsense personalities. Like we're kind of like, no, we're not playing those games. We're not going along with that narrative. We're not mean about it, but it's just like, that's not true. That's not what God's word says. And I'm not going to pretend like it is true. So I love that you just said, hey, they've had a say, they've talked plenty. It's our turn as moms who have lots of older children. So I currently have 5 teens. How about you?
I have 3 teens in the house, and then we have 2 adult daughters that
Yeah.
don't live at home anymore.
Okay. And then my oldest will be 20 in a couple of months. So I'll have my first that's out of the teens. He's been graduated for 3 years. And I think that I know that every single time I talk positively about teenagers specifically on social media, I get so many responses of people telling me that I am the only one. I'm not the only one saying positive things about teens, but I'm the only one they follow that says good things. And I'm guessing you do too.
I think I have a theory for why that is. So,
Okay.
in my experience as an influencer and, somebody that's been online, has an online presence, when our children become teenagers, mine anyway, they become a little camera shy.
Hmm.
And when I'm filming for YouTube or on Instagram, they are they're like, "Oh, mom, I don't want to,
Right.
I don't want to be in that video. And I respect that. And they
Yep.
become, and people right now on YouTube are, people are just weird. So they're saying that I favor Kendrick and Harrison, which is the babies of the family,
Hmm.
because I rarely show Maxwell anymore. And for years, it was the three little boys together. Well, what a lot of people don't realize is Maxwell is 2.5 years older than the two little boys, but he's the same size. With adoption, genetics are wild. So
Yeah.
he's the same size as the two little boys who are just 13 months apart in age. He's a teenager and he has started being a little camera shy. So I'm not showing him, right?
Right.
Because he
Right.
prefers that. And then, in the same sense, what happens is I'm not talking about the things he's going with because I'm taking my cue from him. He's not comfortable. And being a teenager is hard enough with your peers. And a lot of my children's peers have social media.
Yep.
So, because my children don't, they are aware of their friends are seeing them
Hmm.
on social media, and that just becomes very awkward. So we stop sharing about our teenagers. And this is when the little boys were little and they were having their issues. I often would share a clip and say, "Hey, this is how we're working through this." But my teenagers don't want that. So
Right.
what do we do as influencers? We stop talking about teenagers. And parents in general have become so accustomed to getting inspiration from the internet, and everybody becomes death silent about their teenagers.
Mm.
And I think the reason for that is my teenagers don't want me sharing their things, or what they're struggling with, or how I parent them. It becomes more of a private thing. And I think we're leaving a gap. We talk about the little people a lot. We talk about parenting little ones, but personally, I don't share a lot about my teenagers on social media, and it's not because I don't like them or I don't love the stage. It's just because I'm protecting their privacy from the world.
I love that. You can actually hear some of my younger children in the background. I'm watching my mic with the green part on my mic light up as my little boys are coming upstairs to play. So it was like, it was so loud.
Well, Mitchell is on our roof right now. He's working on our roof. So if you hear other noise, it's our 18-year-old working on our roof.
Well,
So,
I haven't heard a thing come through. Yeah, I think
okay.
that is I think that that's a factor. I agree that there are things that I don't share because they are they talk about little people, little problems, big people, big problems. And that doesn't necessarily mean big problems like your child's doing drugs and alcohol. It could, I guess, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means that they're more complex and that there is more of a judgment factor. People are not as quick to have a really critical response to a 2-year-old that is having a tantrum, because developmentally 2-year-olds tend to have tantrums. That's just kind of what they do to some extent. And that's part of how they communicate. And we have to teach them to communicate better. And that's a fairly universal thing. I've had 10 2-year-olds, and not all of them have been tantrum throwers, but more of them have than not. So, and that's okay to say. And we can even say things like teenagers are going to tend to be moodier than toddlers. And people don't get too upset about that. But we would be unwise to be spilling the guts of every single issue that our children have to deal
Well,
with at
it's
any age,
not.
of course.
Yes, and it's not conducive to building relationship with teenagers. And I think everything shifts when they become teenagers. And as parents, we sometimes struggle to make that shift from parent child, where and then suddenly they're requesting more of a adult to adult relationship where
Mhm.
you respect my, space. And for our teenagers, I want to be 100% relationship focused and not social media focused, or, YouTube focused, or any of that. And that's part of the reason I am quiet about my teenagers. I don't mind sharing, what works and what doesn't, but you're right. It's different when it's teenagers.
Well, and even beyond sharing the details, I think a lot of the responses that I'm getting are less about details that I'm sharing and more about the fact that I'm speaking positively at all. Like, even not
Yes.
sharing anything specific that they've done. It's just, I say things like, I love teenagers. They're a blast. They're fun to spend time with. And people are like, why isn't anybody else saying this? And again, I don't actually think I'm the only one saying this. I hear you saying this. I hear Greta Eskridge saying this. I hear a lot of the moms with older kids. Ruth Jo Simon says this.
But I
Mockabee,
think
lots of
I think the question or the response that you're getting is from mothers that aren't quite yet at that stage, and
right.
they want to know, what do you like about having teenagers? Why, they want to know, how did you get there, because everybody else is telling me that I'm going to hate that stage.
Yes, they
And
absolutely are being told that.
so I think the moms that we're hearing from are the ones that are just at the cusp of that teenager stage, and they're saying, throw me a lifeline. Like, why do you love them, and what did you do so that they are pleasant? And my answer to that is, you have to be 100% relationship focused.
Mm,
And Elvin and I grew up in a very legalistic culture where there is no room for your ideas. There's no room for anything except conformity. And so we set out to find a balance. And with your older children, they're the guinea pigs. You try different things and you're like, oh, that didn't work. And then the next day you try something else from the time they're little. And so we set out to find a balance. And what we learned, okay, so real quick, I really, really love my family and I really value the culture that I grew up in. But if you want rebellious teenagers, become legalistic and make everything about your rules.
mhm.
And the number one thing that we learned when coming from, if they're not doing exactly as you say, then they are being disobedient and sinful.
Mhm.
And that's supposed to follow them all the way through. But the number one thing that people told us is, if you leave the Mennonite culture, your children are going to be lost to the secular world. They're going to be into drugs and drinking and, having babies out of wedlock, all of that stuff. That was what was spoken over us when we left. And as we turned to God, the more we started learning about God and his heart for us, the more we started realizing that what God desires for us with our teenagers is relationship. And that when you have relationship, everything else tends to fall into place. The same way as I started growing in my relationship to God, it wasn't so much about what dress is modest, it was about where my heart posture was when I chose an outfit, right?
Yeah.
And so this brings me to a story of our oldest daughter was, I would say she was maybe 14, and I know she won't care that I share this because I've shared with her how big of a learning moment that was for me. And my mom was visiting and we were going somewhere, and our oldest daughter was wearing a pair of shorts. And a couple things happened. They were shorter probably than what I would have suggested she wear, but I do think that she knew that I wouldn't say anything because mom was here, right? Kind of that there's, but my mom um took me to task for allowing her to wear them. And so I didn't say much, but I went to the Lord with it and I prayed about it. And I'm like, Lord, I have no idea, because of the culture I came from, where there was a certain pattern that you could use to make your dresses, and everybody had to use that pattern. So everybody was alike, right? I have zero experience on which shorts are the proper length, right? And what God started teaching me is that it is a personal conviction thing. The more I control what she wears, the longer it'll take her to learn what she's comfortable in. So, personal conviction, not saying I let her wear whatever, right? We had some boundaries and things. But for her, the sooner I step back and let her hear from God, the sooner she's going to fall under what God requires of her for modesty.
Mm,
And so that was kind of the big thing where the first time where God was like, you don't have to be in control of everything. If your children know God, God can work in your children.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so good. I talk about this a lot with this idea, and we talked about this in the last episode, but not growing weary of doing good, for in the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. And I think that especially young moms, but moms of any age can assume that that means that the harvest is in their children turning out the way that they want based on the effort that they put in. So we don't grow weary of doing good. Like, we put in all of this work in the elementary and the middle school and the early high, like the JV, and then the high school years. And then, we launch them into the world as these godly, perfect people because we did what God asked us to do. And I have seen firsthand several of my friends who have dealt with the disillusionment of being faithful to teach God's word to their children, being faithful to hold standards, being faithful to pursue relationship, being faithful to steward and guide their children well and disciple them and model for them, and just really be awesome parents, honestly, and still have their children influenced by the world, drawn away by relationships, deceived, honestly, and have to stand on their own 2 feet on their own faith. And they're not done yet. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Who knows what he's going to do when he's 25, Um, and they're having to recognize that that verse is talking about the harvest that comes in us, if nothing else. We don't grow weary of doing good because the Lord is working a harvest in us. I think the harvest happens in our children too, to varying
I
degrees.
think I'm getting emotional hearing you talk about this because that was when we left the Mennonite culture. We had to choose between serving our community and our family, pleasing our parents, over choosing where we knew God was calling us.
Mm.
And it was the hardest thing we've ever done, but it broke me to pieces to know that to follow God's calling, I had to displease my parents.
Mm. Hmm.
And so we set out, and I know we don't do this perfectly, but it is at the forefront of raising teenagers, is I don't ever want my teenagers to be confused between pleasing my mother or pleasing God. Like, I want to launch my children from an early age, start taking myself out of the picture
Yeah.
and saying, what do you feel God is calling you to do? What do you think the Bible says about this? Because I don't ever want my children to hear from God and then say, but my mom is not going to be happy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That means that we have set ourselves up as a form of an idol for them, or that they view us more as their Holy Spirit than the actual Holy
And
Spirit.
they need to, and it comes back to, even as something that to me was huge when we first left the Mennonites, and I've actually learned it's not that big of a deal, is modesty in my young girls. Now, our children go to a private school. They don't have a huge secular influence, so it may look different if they went to a public school or something like that. There may be more pressure to conform, but the thing that I was so scared of is actually not that big of a deal. It's only a big deal if I care more about what other people think about the way my girls are dressing than I care about helping them develop, what does God say about the way you should dress? How do you feel that God views what you're choosing to wear? And it's actually it has set me free a lot to know that I can trust God enough to work in my children's lives, and I don't have to be God in their life. I don't have to bring conviction all the time, that I can trust that God is going to bring the conviction in due time.
That's so good. And it's interesting because we are in a fairly conservative community, but it is very different than a horse and buggy Mennonite community, obviously. And we don't have any background in that. And so on the flip side, we have kind of the more conventional concern with modesty, which is that our girls are viewed as too modest. Sometimes they have to have the pressure from the world telling like, why are you wearing that? Why are you, like, what's the big deal? Why are you so uptight? And it's not because we are wearing a dress from a pattern like you were talking about. It's just because they actually genuinely at 13 and 15 have convictions personally of, I don't feel comfortable wearing what's in style. I don't feel comfortable showing that. And so they have to be willing to stand strong in the faith that they own and the conviction that they have about modesty when they're having pressure elsewhere that you don't look trendy enough or you don't look cool enough. And there's something, like you say, about about guiding them through that process, because we don't just stand back and go, okay, sink or swim,
Yeah.
whatever. Just, I have no standards. I don't care, at all. We care very much. And I think we're called to care very much. And we're called to train up our children in the teaching and admonition of the Lord. We are not called to be passive. And yet we give them the principles, we give them the guidance, we give them the feedback, we pray for them faithfully, and we still allow them to have some natural consequences and to have those interactions where they find themselves uncomfortable and go, okay. So for example, my mom allowed me to wear a two-piece when I was a teenager. And I appreciated that she didn't flip out when I asked, because typically I was like super modest, or at least super modest for, what I was allowed to wear, shorts and t-shirts and things like that. Mine were typically longer, higher at the neck, things like that. But I wanted to try out this kind of tank top and boy shorts two-piece. And I chose on my own eventually to not wear that anymore because I just didn't feel comfortable in it. And I think we have to be careful. I will say this. I think we have to be careful not to convey that we're saying that our comfort levels equal what's right or wrong.
Yes. Yes.
But that was conviction. My discomfort in wearing that anymore, when I had wanted to fit in and my mom had said, you can try it. I mean, she would have said no to certain two pieces, certainly, but she said, you can try it. And I came to the conclusion on my own, trying it, that, you know what? I don't really enjoy the looks that I'm getting or how I feel, or not being able to bend over a certain way. I'd rather be comfortable. I'd rather be practical. And you can still be cute too, but that was conviction from the Lord. It wasn't just my being like, you know what? It doesn't bother me. So then it's not a sin, you know?
Well, the lesson there is your mom had the wisdom to allow personal room for personal conviction. And that's the whole thing about raising teenagers. And sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes it
Mhm.
presses us outside of our comfort zone. And those are the times when I just really go to God and I'll say, okay, Lord, um I'm just starting to feel the pressure here, and I have to check myself, because is it because I'm afraid of what other people are going to think? And
Right.
that's kind of my default, because I've always assumed it's because of the culture I was raised in the closed community, where conformity is what makes you fit in, right? That's what creates acceptance. So I have to always be super careful to be like, am I getting uncomfortable simply because I think other people might be talking about this, or other people are thinking less of me as a parent
Yeah.
because of this? So it's always when I start feeling like the Lord is taking too long, right, to bring conviction to a teenager, I have to, number one, check my spirit and make sure that it's not pride in me for how I'm viewed as a parent. Um, and I have to really check myself there, and I'll just ask the Lord. I'm like, Lord, if you need me to say something, I'm ready. I am ready. I've got the words at the tip of my tongue, and I'm only waiting for the okay from you. And there's been times where God has allowed me to say, hey, I think you need to really check what's going on here,
Yeah.
and I'll check back with you in a couple days when you've had time to pray about this, but I'm feeling uncomfortable. But I like with my teenagers, I always give, like, I try to tell myself, give 2 or 3 days, have the conversation and say, this is what I'm thinking. And can we come back and talk about this in 2 or 3 days? Because my teenagers tend to be, and I know this is human nature, I know this is part DNA, their first instinct is to be defensive and to make excuses.
Mhm.
So it takes the pressure off if I can simply say, hey, here's how I'm feeling. You don't have to make a response. I would like for you to pray about it. And can we visit about this again on the weekend? And that has worked so well for us, just because it gives a little bit of time.
And it keeps
And
the lines of communication open, which I think is one of the
yes,
most key things with both loving and liking your teenagers is you have to be part of that relationally focused aspect of their growing up where you, oh my word, walk that tightrope of they're still in your home. You still have your boundaries. Like there was a particular thing one child wanted to do, and I just laughingly, but I meant it, was like, you're welcome to when you don't live here. But because you live
absolutely.
here, it's not happening while you're here. And he laughed. He was like, you got it, mom. Like, of course, like this is you're allowed to have these rules. You're paying for the roof over my head, like you love me, you've invested in me. Sure, you can have that boundary still, even though a lot of people in the world would be like, how dare you have that boundary? He's this age.
Yes, right.
And
But you're living under our roof. That does carry weight.
yeah.
And we tell our teenagers, this carries weight. Like this boundary, because you live under our roof, is because we're still raising your younger siblings, right?
Mhm.
Under
Mhm.
this roof. And for that reason, these are the boundaries for this roof.
Yeah. We have a rule of very, very few sleepovers. We'll make exceptions for very practical instances, or like where it kind of can't be avoided because we're traveling or something like that, and there's a certain number of rooms or whatever. And then for family,
I mean, if we're honest, when you have a family your size or my size, every night is
every
a
night's a
sleepover
sleepover.
because there's like three boys in one room.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
But I know what you're
100%.
saying. You're saying outside of the immediate family.
Right. Yeah. And and so obviously that makes us pretty weird. Even among our homeschool Christian friends, like we are, it's not unheard of, but it's not common. And we've had one particular kid that really didn't love that rule. Um, and who has outgrown that rule because our standard is legal adulthood. You can make that decision, but up to legal adulthood, literally your birthday, it's exactly what you were saying. You have younger siblings in the house. They're going to say, if you make that exception for him, even if he's older, why can't I? And I'm okay. I'm actually fine with being, because he has shown the ability to handle it in certain situations. You haven't shown the character yet to have earned this privilege, and he has. And I am allowed as a parent to make that distinction. Also, he's older, he's this, he's that. But in this particular instance, because of the safety aspect involved in it,
Hmm.
we have
Hmm.
made that particular boundary, and other people can make a different boundary. That just works for our family. I'm not trying to lay down anybody like a law for anybody else. And it has helped so much to have that very specific, like, this is when the safety issue is not as big of a concern, and this is the switch, and you're not there yet. So the answer is still no, and
We have the same guidelines when it comes to, phones or dating or sleepovers or all of those things. Is we don't have a set date. I mean, obviously 18 is something to keep in mind, but it is when we feel that you have shown that you can make spiritually sound decisions in this area, then we will know. Like, we can't say when you're 16 you're allowed to date, because we know that not all our children were developmentally at the same place
yeah,
at 16 years old.
yeah,
And then there, like with the dating, that too, who's the other party?
yes,
Like, that's going to play a big role in, yes, he can come over, or no, not yet. Like, so there is no magic age. It's all circumstance and where is the child in their development, in their decision making, in their identity in Christ, all of that.
yeah. I think that is the way to go with most areas, because if you do the hard and fast, I have a friend who is 60. She has mostly adult children, but she had one at 48, so she still has a like a 12-year-old at home, and another that's a will be a high school senior. So she's got a couple kids at home, and one of them was scandalized because her older brother was allowed to date in high school, whereas generally the rule was that they were to wait till after high school to officially date. They might have somebody they liked who spent time with the family, but they weren't an official couple. And they allowed it for this one son because they saw his maturity, because they saw, and quite honestly, let's just be completely frank. There are certain things that we start out with as hard and fast rules with our first two while we're guinea pigging it up. And then we
Yeah.
and then we recognize that they're not as necessary for a different personality, or holding that hard and fast line hasn't served us well because it has sparked like rebellion, or maybe not rebellion, but like pushback. And we're like, oh, that's fair. I've reconsidered. So this mom is like dealing with a kid that's way down the line, and she has adult children with children of their own. And she said, yeah, you can date. And the younger daughter right below him was she's a very sweet personality. So I bet her version of scandalized was pretty calm, but she was like, Mom, that's not our rules. Well, guess what? Now there's a boy who likes her and she hasn't graduated yet, but she's very mature and she's very responsible. And so her parents were teasing her. They were like, so you want us to probably like wait till you're graduated, right? So that we stick to the rules. And she's like, maybe not, like, thank you so much that you take into account my maturity level and, take me into account as a human being. So I want to talk. We talked a lot about. I love this conversation is just organically flowing into all these areas of how we interact with our teens, how we set boundaries, how we determine like when to hold them and when to be looser and are prayerful, and we want them to own their faith. But I think that actually does contribute to what I want to talk about next. But we've talked about how much we like teens, and there's a whole lot of parents who are just either on the cusp of having teenagers like you mentioned, or they only have small children they can't even imagine. And they are literally being told, well, enjoy the sweetness while it lasts because it goes away completely. And there's a narrative that every teen will be rebellious. Every teen will be doing everything illicit they possibly can the moment that they get the opportunity to do so. Every teen will think that you're an idiot. Like that is what the media portrays, is that all teens think that every single adult is clueless and that they know better. And every teen will not want to have anything to do with you. Like, they just see ya. And you talked in our last episode about how their roles change and their social schedules change, and they start to work and they start to drive. And 100%, yes, there will be a shift. And if we try to claw onto them and not let them grow up, that's a great way to lose them. I would say that. But tell me things you like about your teens, RuthAnn, or your young adults.
Oh, I'm not gonna get emotional, right?
No, you're definitely
But
not.
I am so deep into my feelings right now because our oldest son just turned 18 and he's well on his way to be a man. I mean, he acts like he's 25, makes decisions like most 25-year-olds. And then at the same time, I have my 9 and 10-year-olds crawling onto my lap I mean, they squish me. I'm not
Yeah.
that big,
Yeah.
right? And they squish me. And last night they wanted to share, and they're like this, they're 13-month apart. So they do everything together. And so they're reading Calvin and Hobbes, but they want to share it with me because it's this hilarious middle school type humor in Calvin and Hobbes,
Yeah.
and so they're both on the recliner with me, and I'm like inside I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot breathe, I am tired, my leg can't move, my arm is squished, but somehow I'm seeing them as an 18-year-old, and I know that in the blink of an eye they're going to be going through the house, and some days I'll simply get grunts as responses, and I'm going to miss them so much. And anyway, so I'm just like, I'm in this little whirlwind of I'm going to hang on to my little boys as long as possible. But Lord, please don't let me spoil them, right? I need to let them grow up. But it just seems like it goes so fast.
Hmm.
But what I do love about having an 18-year-old son is I love that he's always been a mama's boy, and not in that type of way, right? But he's very in tune with me. He doesn't need to be with me all the time. Not in the negative
Right.
way,
Right.
mama's boy, right?
Yeah, he loves
Um,
you and he loves being around you, but he's not, he doesn't need you to hold his hand and do things for him.
no, exactly. He doesn't need my feedback or my approval for almost every decision that he makes. Um, but what I do love about it right now is so he has a girlfriend. He's been dating for about a year, and there's moms that are stuck in the purity culture that are backpedaling and saying, wait, she said he's 18, so he must have started dating at 17, Anyway, what I love right now is that he wants me to be interested in this relationship. Like he's saying, "Hey, look what I bought her for Valentine's Day. Do you
Yeah.
like this? Will you help me wrap this?" So that's a new way that we've started connecting. And I really love that we can have the conversations of what it's going to look like to be a godly husband. What are some of the challenges that, you see coming up? And I really like that when he needs an appointment made, absolutely he can call, but that he'll come to me and say, "Hey, will you make me an appointment for, whatever?" And so he's kind of at that stage where I'm happy to do things for him. Where with my little boys, I'm like, you pack your own lunch because you need the skill and you need the responsibility.
Yeah.
But because I can see our older son about ready to fly the coop, I am taking every opportunity I can to say, here, I made this for your lunch.
Yeah.
Because I know those times are so short. There's only a few of those times left. So I'm really enjoying that. And then for teenage daughters, this is my third teenage daughter. I absolutely love sharing passions and hobbies with them
Mhm.
and watching Pride and Prejudice, watching our
Yes.
favorite movies together,
Yes.
saying, hey, do you like that guy better or that guy better? Like, which character are you more attracted to? I mean, it's just the little things, but my adult daughters and even my teenage daughter, they really are my closest female friends.
I love it.
And I love my teenage daughter and my adult daughters. They're my favorite people to be with. They, tell me what to wear. They send me pictures of haircuts that would look good. They basically are raising me.
Oh, that's so cute.
As
That's
far
so
as
cute.
it comes to like they dress me, they tell me, and it's all in fun, but yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love conversations with them because they are starting to come back and not regurgitate things that I've taught them, but have their own take on biblical principles that we've talked about for years.
Yes.
Ezra, my oldest, the other day I said something and it wasn't like a correction, like a no, mom, you're wrong, but it was like, well, not only that, but this aspect of it. And I was like,
Oh,
you're absolutely
that's one
right.
of I love when my teenagers say, well, not only that, mom, but have you ever considered this?
Yeah.
It thrills me to no end because I know they're developing their own worldview apart from my ideas and my experience.
Yep. Yeah, my girls get in my closet all the time, which I love right up to the point where I can't find the thing that I wanted. Or like one of my 13-year-olds walked by wearing the shirt that I was like, I I bought that 3 months ago and I haven't been able to find it and I haven't even worn it yet. I
Oh,
literally was
I'm
like,
so glad that I'm not the only one that's like, wait, I had a Chosen t-shirt.
yeah,
I have not seen it. Either one of the boys wore it because my boys are being starting to be able to wear my t-shirts
yeah,
too. I need to go upstairs, but I'm glad I'm not the only one that
no.
clothes just disappear. We have a strict laundry schedule,
Uh-huh.
but there's still clothes that I haven't seen.
Yep, same. My girls do. I don't know how strict ours is, I'll be completely honest, because they do their own laundry and sometimes I walk in and I'm like, what day is it? Because this laundry is not done. Come on, girls. Um, but there will be things and I'll go, wait a minute, take that off. I haven't even gotten to wear that yet. And I mean it. I'm like, go change. I want to be the one that has the inaugural wear of the thing that I paid for. and they'll be like, oh, it was in Della's drawer. I'm like, well, how did Della get it? But mostly like we do mom and daughter dates. So and that usually looks like, hey, after dinner, can we all go jump in the car? There's a little shopping center that's like 10 minutes from our house. Can we all jump in the car and go to TJ Maxx and walk around? And the last time we went, they all bought each other something without knowing what it
Oh,
was. So they raced around and found each other a treat or something, like we're like hiding it under their, well, I was like, don't hide it under your shirt. They're going to think you're stealing it, you know? But they are funny and they are sweet and they have great taste in movies and they have common sense. And it's not just my kids. This is not just my bragging on my kids. I have lots of friends who speak so well of their teenagers. And there isn't a formula for, quote, turning out a kid a certain way. But I will tell you this, you are much more likely to have a kid that you actually enjoy being around if you start out with the assumption that one, that's possible, and that two, it's at least part of your job to help them be someone that people like being around. If we start with the assumption that we have no control over this, that it's kind of just this Russian roulette, and probably you're going to end up with a really cranky teen all the time, and yeah, there are hormones, and yeah, there are days they only grunt at you, and yeah, there are times that they respond with defensiveness, or they don't do the thing you ask them to do 3 times in a row, and you have to have that hard conversation. Yeah, there are times where you're thinking, what in the world was going through your head? And you're embarrassed, because we're humans. And while it is not our goal to do things to please men instead of God, we are trying to please God. We also want our children to live in a way that their light so shines before men that they praise their Father in heaven. And when their light's not shining before men and God's not getting praised, that hurts our hearts and it embarrasses us sometimes. And we have to
Mhm.
push through that and say, well, what's my motivation? And how
Yes,
do I
that
reach
right
their
there is,
hearts?
I think that is a huge question that parents need to learn to ask themselves when they're raising teens. Is because I know I have had to learn this and I still have to remind myself, what is my motivation here?
Mhm.
Why do I feel so strongly about this? And God usually, if you're saying those words to God, Lord, show me what my motivation is here. Show me why I'm feeling so strongly. God is almost always going to change your heart in the process because prayer has a way of changing our heart
Yeah.
more than it changes the circumstances, and it imparts wisdom
Yeah.
and inspiration. So my number one advice would be check yourself before you say anything. And I know that's huge because some of us are reactive.
Yeah.
Um, but check yourself and say, Lord, why am I feeling so strongly about this? And Lord, show me if this is a me issue. And, maybe it's not a teen issue. Maybe I am afraid of what other people in the community are going to think. And it really isn't immoral. It's just because it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So for me, that was huge. And my daughters actually helped me with this because they would say to me, so we had 2 girls first, and they remember being Mennonite, right? So they grasp more than our 5 younger children do. They grasp what we came out of
Yeah.
more than the younger children do. So my older daughters would often ask me, Mom, do you really care because this is, immoral, or do you care because of what people are going to
Mhm.
think of you as a parent? So they helped me like see through some of those things, and they helped me learn to turn to God before I put my foot down and made a hard and fast rule. Um, so that was a deep, a long, it's an ongoing healing journey for me, is to allow my children to make mistakes in public, um and be uncomfortable, and not make it about my pride or what kind of parent I am, but to allow my children to walk through hard things so that God can get his will done in their lives. Because I think one of the mistakes that we make. And this is easy to do because we really are God in the little children's lives, right?
Mm. Yeah, in
We
some
are
ways, sure.
playing, yes, we're playing a role, that role. And then when they become teenagers, it's hard for us to quit playing God in their life
Yeah.
and, say, try to convict them. And we've talked about this before, but God needs our children to go through things
Yeah.
so that he can shape them and mold them into who he wants them to be. Like it, even like when it comes to, so I don't know where you stand as far as dating and purity culture goes, but one of the things that I see a lot of parents doing is playing God when it comes to who their children are going to marry or date. Now, there's obvious big red flags, right?
Yeah.
That we all should be aware of. But who are we to play God and not and say, well, this child or this teenager, I know her baggage that she would bring to a marriage, because I have seen him grow up. I've seen his family, so I know what baggage he would bring to a marriage, and I don't want that for you.
Yeah.
But what if the baggage that person, because we all have baggage,
Yeah.
what if the baggage that boy or girl brings into a marriage, what if that is exactly the thing that God needs to refine our child into the person that God needs for them to be to get his will done in this world? And
Mm-hmm.
so we can't play God and say, that family's not good enough, or, he's from divorced parents, or, we cannot play God in our children's lives. It's not okay, because God needs for us, like, God needs some hard things in our children's lives. So
100%.
I'm not saying, that there's not big red flags that we should be aware of, but I'm saying we can't play God in
Yeah.
our teenagers' lives or young adult children's lives.
Absolutely. I said we were going to talk about parentification, but I think that might be an entire
Oh,
episode because I know you have to go and we would be here for a while talking about that. So we're going to skip that
I
topic.
do. Okay, let's do come back, because I get that a lot, and if we could put it out there for the masses,
Oh yeah, we
that
need
would
to
be
have the
helpful.
conversation. Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up now. And I just love that what you finished with, we can't play God. I think any parent who is trying to play God in their teenagers' lives is going to encounter a lot of resistance, and rightly so. But we also can't be passive. And I don't think anyone would ever listen to this episode and hear us saying passivity is even
No.
an option. And we also have to have that First Corinthians 13 mindset where love hopes all things. It is looking with positivity. It is overlooking sins. It's covering. It is this idea of expecting the good. So,
Oh yeah, and so it all falls under, um the things that we're talking about are not like, we've already laid the foundation. Like, we have worked with these children from the time they're 2 and 3 and 4, and this is the family expectation. And I had this conversation with my sisters here recently, that when you do the hard work, and I can see this in your family so much, Abby, and it's such an inspiration to me, even though I'm, a couple years ahead of you as far as how old our children are. When you keep your nose to the grindstone, so to say, and you do the hard work and you stay intentional, you get to relax and enjoy your teenagers, because you have laid the foundation of God is in charge of their life. They answer to God more than they answer to me. There's that shift that begins to happen, and it gives you the freedom. And no, we're not passive. We've just done the hard work. So when you see us with our 16-year-olds and our 18-year-olds, and we're just having a good old time, and nobody's smoking or drinking or, sleeping around, it's not because we've been passive at
yeah.
all. We have done the work. And when you see us enjoying our teenagers, it's because the hard years are behind us. And we've now shifted where God is the authority in their life, and we've slowly directed them to God. And we now know that we are no longer the number one authority in their life.
Yeah, that's it. That is it. That you've handed them over to the Lord. They were always the Lord's, but you've really just reached that stage where it's almost like teaching your kid to ride a bike. And you start out with your hand on the handlebars, directing everything. And then you move to where your hands are on the seat behind and they're holding the handlebars, and they don't realize that you're still having a pretty decent amount of control over,
Influence.
yeah, influence over whether they fall or not. And then you say, Lord, show me when to take my hand off. And it's not that you never have any influence anymore. I love that you were talking about how your
Yes,
daughters invest in your life and tell you what to wear and give you style tips and are your best friends. But I'm sure they also still come to you for wisdom because they know that you have walked with
yeah.
the Lord longer than they have.
Well, and the thing is, like, you're still there for influence, even though they don't realize it. And here's the other beautiful thing, and we can't wrap up this session about teenagers without saying the happiest surprise ever that I have discovered in now that we have adult children. So you know how with your older children, when they were like 8 and 12 and whatever, you just feel like I'm in over my head. I've got all of these children to go, and
Yeah.
it's already so hard, and I don't know if I'm going to have enough
Yeah.
energy. And
Yeah.
Lord, you've got to come. You've got to come back before I get, because I'm going to run out. Okay, so what happens? So we've done, like, you've kept your nose to the grindstone, you've been intentional, and you've made that smooth transition of power where you hand them over, and God's the number one authority, and they go and get married, and they start having babies, and they move away. And so we've made this mandatory family dinner, but I call it mandatory, but everybody shows up willingly on their own free will. And but what I've noticed happening is there's this little family culture where Elvin and I do not have to do near as much influencing and parenting with the younger
Yes.
boys
Yes.
because the older siblings and our daughters both married so well. And so we've created this little family culture, and the boat is going on its own. And Elvin and I just set it on the course. And sometimes we sit back and we're like, yeah, that's exactly what I would have said, but I didn't have to say it because the
This
son-in-law
morning.
said it,
Yes, this
and
morning,
it is
6-year-old did that.
so to encourage people with large families that are at that stage where I'm never going to be able to keep up this pace.
Hmm.
You're going to get a break because if you do it well, you're creating a family culture that is going to take off, and you're not going to have to always be putting in 200% effort.
Yeah.
You are going to be able to sit back and say, "Oh, that bike's pedaling its own for now."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was a very happy surprise that I just am starting to fully realize in probably the last year or 2 years.
Yep. And there's a knee-jerk reaction I've had before that maybe some other moms have experienced, where they realize that something their 8-year-old knows didn't come directly from them. They taught the ones above the 8-year-old, but the 8-year-old learned it from the older ones. And you have this flash of guilt that you didn't necessarily put in as much effort with the 8-year-old. And then you go, wait a minute. What am I doing? I did put in a ton of effort. I'm getting to reap from that effort. It doesn't always happen just like that. But instead of going, oops, I should have been the disseminator of every bit of information and wisdom, we can praise God that He has created the family such that when you're investing in those first kids and there's that trickle down effect, it isn't as taxing when you get to the 4 and the 5 in some ways. In other ways, it is. So this morning, my 18-year-old 100% said to his 5-year-old, one of his 5-year-old twin brothers, "Hey, bud, you can say that again in a non-fussy voice. You're welcome to have some milk, but you don't need to fuss about it." And I was like, yes, absolutely, way to go.
And that is where this is a beautiful segue into next episode that we do
Yes,
together
yes,
on parentification, because there's that beautiful balance of families. And I really, it's a whole episode in itself where you start, like, your 18-year-old, I mean, he knows things that most fathers don't know, right?
it's true.
Because he's been exposed to them. We cannot call parentification 100% negative. And I cannot wait to unpack that for you, the positive side of what the world sees as negative parentification.
Yeah. So RuthAnn and I are going to get off this episode and we're going to look at our calendars and try to figure out when we can next talk
Yeah.
about that, because it took us like 6 months to get this episode recorded, or these 2 episodes recorded. But thank you so much, RuthAnn, for taking the time. And I'm glad we made it work, because these were such, like I said in the first time, that it's a productive conversation. I love productive conversations where it's not just, well, I think, and this, it's like, here is how this practically looks on a day-to-day basis in a real family, with real sinners being sanctified by the grace of Jesus, who are repenting daily and striving to keep going, because we know that He who began a good work in us will bring it to completion on the day of Christ Jesus. RuthAnn, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you, Abby. It was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed the M's for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.